the roll call, that'd be great.
Council President Furman.
Present.
Alder Revere. Alder Revere.
Here.
Alder Vitiver.
Present.
Alder Evers.
Here.
Council President Furman, you have quorum.
Great, thank you. Stefan, if you can give the introduction, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Welcome to our virtual meeting. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. Members of the committee, if you're able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you're able, please activate your video when you're speaking. In this meeting, panelists have the ability to mute and unmute themselves. Please use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. Staff, please use the raise hand feature when you're asked a question. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. We do not currently have any members of the public registered to speak. So President Furman, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. The next item on our agenda would be disclosures and recusals. Are there any members of the Finance Committee that have any disclosures or recusals to make? Okay, not seeing any, we will move on to the consent agenda. We have on our agenda today, we have some regular finance committee agenda, and then we will be dealing with capital budget. And so I will assume any motion that we make will not include the capital budget deliberations, item number 31. Are there other items members would like to see removed from the consent agenda? Alder Vitiver, go ahead.
Could we discuss item 30, please?
30, okay. Thank you. Alder Revere.
Same item. Thank you, President Furman.
While you've got yourself unmuted, Alder Revere, would you like to make a motion?
I'm pleased to do so. I move that the Finance Committee recommend adoption of agenda items number 2 through 29.
Thank you. Can I get a second?
Second.
Great. I don't see any objection. I'm going to assume approval by unanimous consent. Great. And we will move on to item number 30. Actually, we'll move on to public comment. We do not have anybody registered for public comment. We have somebody available for questions on an item that we did already approve. So we will move into item number 30. Can I get a motion for that, Alder Revere?
Move adoption.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you. Alder Vitiver, did you want to ask questions?
Yes, I just had a question about the $1,000 bonus, if that is the same as the $1,000 bonus for all staff that has been proposed from the insurance fund, or if it is something additional.
Hi, yeah. So that is the same $1,000 that all employees would receive in February.
Great, thank you. Alder Revere, did you have a question or questions?
Indeed, thank you again, President. Hi, Aaron. First, congratulations on your well-deserved promotion. I believe it's your first public appearance before us since your promotion went into effect as our manager. Could you please perhaps begin with the traditional walkthrough of your report as you and your predecessors have traditionally done for us with collective bargaining agreements?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So this agreement with MPPOA, we were able to come to agreement on September 6th of this year. We had been in a lengthy period of mediation with the commissioner from the Wisconsin Employment Relations Commission, mediating those sessions for most of this year, just reaching for a short period until last year. We were able to come to agreement on a wage package, A, B, C, and D of the items under wages. Are all wage increases to reflect the same wage increases that other protective service and other staff have subsequently had this year. So $50 increase is equivalent to a 1.5% wage increase. For 2021, $65 is equivalent to a 2% wage increase for that was 2022, 2% for 2023, and then 3% in 2024 and 2025 respectively. So this is a 4-year agreement. The first 3 years mirror that of fire. The last year is an additional 3% in that 4th year. We also talked extensively about the impacts of inflation during that mediation process, and their concerns about employees seeing increased health insurance costs, increased costs really across the board, and a 1.5% wage increase, which really ends up looking something like a reduction. And so did agree to a one-time payment in 2023 to help offset some of those concerns. The contract term is 2022 through 2025, so it's a 4-year agreement. And there are a few additional items that we included there. Most of them at no additional cost. Some changes to incorporate recently agreed upon language related to promotional processes, as well as language related to the educational incentive that precludes on-duty time from earning additional educational incentive points. Changes to holidays that were similar to those in all of the other groups, including adding of Juneteenth, and then renaming the day after Thanksgiving as Ho Chunk Day, and then including some clarifying language related to holiday pay in terms of when folks come in and how that time gets prorated. We also included a change to IRS mileage rate, a change in senior patrol officer pay. That's a sort of premium that folks get for selecting shifts other than sort of the standard day shift for the most senior officers. This doesn't change the amount of officers that are eligible for that premium. It just changes the qualifiers for how many years they have to have on in order to be eligible for that. Only a specific number, I think it's 5 per shift that get it, and so it hasn't changed that number. We had a change in retiree health insurance benefits that was really just a holdover from the last time, where we had agreed to modify the retiree health insurance language to mirror that of current employees. So there was 88% of the average tier 1 health insurance that the city is obligated to pay. It was our understanding and how we've been operating, but this is really just an update of that language. And then it's the addition of a floating wellness day. It's 1 wellness day per year for 4 years, and then those go away at the end of the agreement. So there isn't any long-term cost to that. So that's the extent of the changes and the agreement. Do you have any other specific questions for me?
Yes, thank you, Erin. And you touched on it as part of your overview, but can you explain in a little detail what the relevant differences are between the 311 current collective bargaining agreement and the one before us now? Not the ones related to obviously to the specific departments, and the modifications there, but in terms of wages, for example.
Yeah. So the three main differences are, number one, we included flat increases in years 1 and 2 of this agreement, so 2022 and 2023. The purpose of that is really to give an equivalent wage increase, but bring up the folks at the bottom of that wage scale a little bit more, and the folks at the top of that wage scale a little bit less. This improves the hiring rate for new employees, and so potentially includes our ability to recruit. It's also, I mean, we have a very young department, right? I think I heard at one point during this negotiation that like 50% had less than 5 years. And so this focuses on a flat increase so that the folks on the bottom end get a little bit more. So that flat increase is change number one. Change number two is the addition of the fourth year, which is at 3%. It would cover the entirety of 2025. And then change number three is this $1,000 one-time inflationary payment that has been budgeted for next year for all city employees.
Thank you. On that final point, and obviously this was the first question you answered today in this meeting, but am I understanding correctly that and I know we're going to be discussing this probably at a fair amount as we are in our operating budget deliberations next month in this committee, but am I understanding the current proposal for the $1,000 one-time payments would not include those that are currently in collective bargaining agreements aside from this one? Or
no, that's not correct. It is budgeted to impact all permanent employees, so that would include those folks who are Teamsters and those folks who are in IAFF as recipients of that one-time payment. IAFF is our International Association of Firefighters.
Right. Do we have to reopen those contracts technically to provide that?
No, we really don't need to. If we were like looking at adding item D, the 3% increase, which extends the length of the agreement, we would need to reopen that agreement. But we can provide a one-time payment through a simple MOU with the affected unions.
Yeah, that's what I meant, an MOU. So there will be MOU with those.
Yeah, it's not really a reopen of the agreement per se, but yeah, it's an amendment to the agreement with an MOU. But that's a fairly simple process. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think lastly, the floating wellness day, I presume that was proposed by MPPOA, and that to your recollection was never anything that was discussed as part of the 311 bargaining.
It was not discussed as part of the 311 bargaining. It was, I think the conversation around that really had to do with some of the additional overtime folks have worked and some of the additional stressors over the course of the last few years, and the desire to make sure folks have adequate time to take care of themselves and that sort of thing.
I appreciate that. Mm-hmm. And I promise this will be the last one. And I don't know if this is a fair question. Sorry to put you on the spot in your newly minted role here, but can you just, in your estimation, share with us why you think this bargaining was more lengthy than they normally are, especially when, from my tenure on this committee, 311 and MPPOA have really followed each other's negotiations, and obviously MPPOA took a different approach this year. And you already mentioned you had the assistance of the mediator for many months. So just out of curiosity, do you mind sharing with us as our labor relations manager why you think that this took longer than I think many of us anticipated, and also do you think we were close to going to arbitration?
Yeah, I do think we were close to going to arbitration. I think, I don't want to speak for them, but I think, I think this has been a challenging environment to come to agreement in. And I don't know that I necessarily want to go further into that, but, I think they always have to consider what they can get ratified by their membership, right? And people are whole human beings that come to work with feelings about about their job and their work and, their employer that sometimes mean that we have a difference of opinion in terms of what a fair agreement looks like. And MPPOA had to consider what they could feasibly get ratified. And so I think they were in a position where they needed to make sure it was something that their membership would have buy-in for. In addition, I would say, as we went along, if we had settled it a little earlier, it might not have taken as long. As we went along, inflation continued to increase, and that continued to put pressure, I think, in terms of, the willingness to come to agreement on, what is not a front-loaded agreement, right? It's 1.5% in the first year, which is if you look over the course of time, I think it's a really fair agreement on both sides. But if you were to look at it this year alone, it's a difficult year to take a 1.5% wage increase.
I really appreciate your insight there. Thank you. I thought one last question. I'm sorry I keep prolonging this, but do you know, was the final ratification vote overwhelmingly in favor by the members?
I do not know what that. I only know that they did ratify.
They ratified it, but you weren't.
So, yeah.
You don't know if it was close or not. Out of curiosity.
I do not know that.
Okay. Very good. Thanks again for everything, Aaron. Appreciate it.
Certainly.
Thank you, President Furman.
Thank you, Alder Revere. Thank you, Aaron. Any other questions? Not seeing any. Unless I see a hand, I'm going to assume approval by unanimous consent. All right. We will now move on to the next item on our agenda, which is our the executive capital budget. We have 10 amendments that we'll be looking at this evening. I will be asking Alder Revere to assist me with this since he has done this a lot, and somebody needs to make motions. Alder Revere, whenever you're ready, I think I'll first ask, does finance staff have any sort of update that they want to provide us before we jump into considering the amendments?
I don't think we have any updates. If you need to see the amendments, we can certainly share screen. Otherwise, I think you have all of the materials. You will want to move the capital budget and then begin to move the amendments to it.
Perfect, thank you. Do people find it helpful if we display the amendments on the screen as they're being considered? I'm not seeing any nodding of yes. Everybody, I assume, has them up. And so, Alder Revere, if you can move the capital budget, and then we will start going through amendments.
Thank you. I move adoption of the 2023 executive capital budget.
Can I get a second? Thank you. And we will jump right into amendment number 1, Alder Revere.
Thank you again. I move adoption of amendment number 1.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you. Alder Revere, would you like to talk about this amendment?
Yes, please. Thank you. And thanks for the seconds by my colleagues there. So trying to not be overly repetitive from the analysis section of the written amendment, I just want to remind my colleagues that I had a colloquy on this topic with our economic development director, Matt Mikolajewski, during our capital budget hearings. And I have several reasons for pursuing this, and Alderperson Heck, I see, is here as well, a fellow State Street area colleague. But my primary motivation, to be clear, was because of the fact of the matter that we have exhausted our current appropriation for these exceedingly popular so-called BIG grants. BIG is the acronym for Building Improvement Grants. As you all know, this is a citywide program using mostly ARPA funds. But in this case, of the new State Street area TIF district, TID 50, the anticipation both from the present year capital budget and out years in the SIP was that the primary funding source would be TIF proceeds borrowing repaid by TID 50 proceeds. So the grants to these independent retailers, in large part mom and pops, are just exceedingly popular, and we stopped taking applications earlier this year. I anticipate that the popularity will not decrease, and that will be the case again next year. Additionally, as you all are aware, under the statutory permission of the so-called half-mile rule, we would be able to offer these grants funded by the State Street Area TIF District to businesses within a half mile if we choose to go the half-mile rule method in the new year, which of course is a process that we must follow state statute if we choose to do so on that. Additionally, the language in the executive capital budget for TID 50 is very broad, and you'll see that it includes many proposed general purposes for the $600,000 that the mayor proposed. And among them that I think is very likely we will need more financial appropriations for is future planning activities and furniture and fixture repairs and upgrades to State Street. At our most recent downtown coordinating committee meeting, Alderperson Heck and I and our colleagues on that committee had a discussion about the future, in particular, of Lower State Street once the Metro Transit network redesign is in effect in June of next year, and the fact that there will no longer be regular Metro service on Lower State Street and the opportunities that provides for potential enhancement of a pedestrian mall concept there. So I don't want to mislead anyone and say, well, this money's needed to hire outside planners and figure out planning efforts for that area, but that is also part of my rationale for offering this amendment. Happy to answer any questions and certainly would welcome your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Revere. Are there any questions for staff? I do have a question. I just wanted to be a little bit clear about the debt for this. It sounds like this is going to be paid for completely by the TID. Is that correct?
Yes, the debt service will be paid by increment generated in Tax Increment District 50, this new State Street TID.
Great, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Any other questions? Is there any discussion? Okay, not seeing any. Unless I see otherwise, I will see approval by unanimous consent. All right, we'll move on to the next item, which is Amendment 2. Alder Revere, motion, please.
Move adoption.
Awesome.
Second.
Thank you. Does a member of staff possibly want to explain this, since Alder Carter and Alder Foster are not here with us this evening? Director Wolf, go ahead.
Yeah, so this proposed amendment would be to move the Hermina Street Ped Bike bridge over Starkweather Creek, which was originally in the proposed budget for 2023, to move that out to 2024 while keeping some funds available in 23 to do public engagement and some design work on that. And then in our budget and on our tip, we were showing a reconstruction of Hermina Street in 2025. So as part of this amendment, we'd be moving that in our reconstruct program up to 2024, so that the Hermina Street Ped Bridge and the reconstruction project will kind of exist in that 2024 timeframe.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Alder Revere, you normally congratulate people. Do you want to take this opportunity to?
Congratulations, my friend, the newly minted city engineer. I look forward to congratulating you again formally when your contract is before the Finance Committee, Jim. But congratulations and thank you, President, for allowing me to be the first to congratulate my old friend.
Thank you very much, Alder Revere and President Furman.
Any questions about this amendment? Discussion. Not seeing any. Unless I see otherwise, I'm going to assume approval by unanimous consent. All right, moving on to amendment number 3. If I can get a motion, Alder Revere.
Move adoption.
Second.
Great. If a member, this was a staff-driven amendment. If Janet, do you want to talk to this?
Yes, thank you. So this amendment is actually to remove a project out of the budget request. It was originally scheduled a couple years ago. We've been kind of carrying it along. And the idea for this project was a flood mitigation effort to help a property on Eastwood be able to develop. We had then, since that point, done some more investigation with our watershed studies, and we determined that there are other improvements in the area that we could do while still allowing this property to develop, so it wouldn't be an issue with flooding when it does develop. So we'd like to delete the project out of this major streets category and out of the citywide flood. It also has TIF funding associated with it. And we would just continue the project when the Eastwood corridor actually gets reconstructed in the future. It'd be a cost savings for us to do that, to capitalize on a street project versus doing a standalone flood project at this point. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Janet. Any questions for Janet? Any discussion? Not seeing any, unless I see otherwise. I'll also assume approval by unanimous consent. All right, moving on to amendment number 4. Alder Revere, can I get a motion?
Move adoption.
Second.
Thank you. Janet, would you like to explain this one? Or Alder Tischler, would you like to explain this one since you're here and you are a co-sponsor?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, just shortly after I became alder, we had that big storm in June. This is a greenway that was heavily damaged. Many trees went down. Construction crews needed access to the power lines, and there's a lot of damage in the area. Got a lot of calls, emails from residents. Again, just couple, I think a week or two after I was on the council, went down and met with the residents, and then also met with the city staff. And this idea is something that kind of resulted from this as a way to improve this greenway. So I'll just want to thank Janet and Ryan and Greg Fries. All of them were my first introduction working with engineering, and so it was very, very positive.
Thank you, Alder Tischler. Is there any questions for staff? Any discussion? Not seeing any, unless I see otherwise. I'm going to assume approval by unanimous consent. All right, moving on to item number 5, Alder Revere.
Move adoption.
Second.
Alder Revere, would you wish to speak to this, or?
Thank you. I'm happy to do so, President Furman. So again, as my colleagues might recall, I had questions about this with our Parks Division staff. My main concern, and as a reminder, this is located in the 13th Aldermanic District, but it was right across the street from the district I'm elected to represent. And many of my constituents enjoy the use of Brittingham boats each season, to be sure. But anyway, my concern was in the executive capital budget, the Brittingham Beach House, a long discussed project that has been moved around in capital budgets for many years now, was located both in the proposed horizon list and in the final year of the SIP, which I thought was both confusing and also perhaps, frankly, a bit of a morale dejection for those that are looking forward to a new and improved facility to serve the recreational needs of the neighborhood and greater area. So park staff was agreeable on this, and that's what this does. You see it as no fiscal impact. It simply removes the reference in the horizon list and keeps this project entirely as a project in the Parks Division section of the budget and the funding in the SIP for planning.
Thank you, Alder. Are there any questions for staff? Discussion. Okay, unless I see otherwise, I'll assume approval by unanimous consent. All right, moving right along. We're up to item number 6, Alder Revere.
Move adoption.
Second.
Thank you. Alder Revere, would you like to discuss this?
Thank you. Well, this is obviously the very exciting Lake Monona Waterfront project that we're starting once again to engage the community on with a kickoff meeting actually next Monday at Central Library. Again, all of my amendments are rooted in conversation with our staff during our budget hearings, and this is no exception. So again, you might recall that I had asked staff to do a deep dive in what the funds that were needed to advance the Lake Monona Waterfront and look at all the numbers very closely. And the analysis done by the project manager, Mike Sturm, was that Parks Division does request this budget amendment to advance the Lake Monona Waterfront funding from 2024 to 2023. And this would ensure that there's sufficient financial support to award the contract to the selected design team for the master plan refinement on a timely basis. So again, supported by Parks Division staff and would certainly welcome your support for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Any questions for staff? Any discussion? Okay, unless I see otherwise, I will assume approval by unanimous consent. All right, we'll move on to item number amendment number 7, Alder Revere.
Thank you. I move adoption.
Second.
Alder Revere, again, would you like to discuss this?
Thank you. Again, you might recall I discussed this with our street superintendent during the public hearings. The narrative in the executive capital budget, I think, is a bit misleading in terms of our annual streets yard improvements project line item, where there's a significant amount of money to make permanent the move of the drop-off site from Badger Road to Olin Avenue, but the narrative didn't explain that. So this really is just a simple clarifying amendment that has no fiscal impact, and appreciate very much staff working on this one as all the other amendments that I put forward, and look forward to the permanent drop-off site and expanded hours being available to the community at some point in the new year. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Any questions for staff? Any discussion? Unless I see otherwise, I will assume approval by unanimous consent. And we move on to amendment number 8. Alder Revere.
Move adoption.
Second.
Thank you. Alder Paulson, would you like to discuss?
Yeah, since we're moving later along, I'm sure we'll go through this one very quickly. I did send a long email to explain this. I'm not the world's greatest speaker, and so I thought it would be easier for you to read some of the background, but I will give the 30-second highlight for folks who haven't read it. Accessible cabs are an important mode of transportation for folks, and it is difficult to get a cab in Madison because of industry headwinds. It is extraordinarily difficult to get an accessible cab in Madison. And in talking with staff and in talking with some of their cab providers, it does turn out that one of the problems here is actually just getting just having the cabs in the fleet. And so this amendment is meant to provide the capability of adding more cabs to the fleet. And I want to emphasize that this is aimed around providing accessible cabs that are scheduled on demand. So it's different than paratransit. Paratransit requires you to schedule at least a day in advance. This is more for if something comes up that morning, you need to be able to get somewhere that day to be able to get a cab. So Alder Miyazi and I did design this program as a very undercooked program to try to, at this stage of it, to not try to ram through a whole program design and eat up a lot of staff time while we're still thinking about what's the right way to do this. So we're bringing forward a broad concept with a default plan, but with the understanding that we're going to go back and review with staff, with the appropriate committees, and come out with a fully designed program that is able to answer questions and be able to examine other issues. What other funding sources should be considered? Should it be a grant program? Should it be matched with something else? There's a lot of unknowns, but we wanted to get the preliminary approval to move forward with this, to get a sense from the larger body that this is something that we would want to proceed. But the intent is to come back to council sometime next spring or early summer with a fully fleshed out program. So again, most of this was in the email, and I hope you had a chance to read it ahead of time. And I think this is a really important need. We heard from folks during the Metro Transit Network redesign that getting around is a challenge, and one of the options here for this sort of flexible resources are just not there. I think this is a great case of where the city can provide some of the resources, and there are partners in the private sector who can meet us there, and we can make something better for everyone in Madison. And yeah, I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Alder Evers.
Thank you, President. Question for Alder Paulson. Are you suggesting that the private sector companies cannot afford to purchase these vehicles themselves, that there aren't sources of financing for these vehicles through private banks?
Yes, I don't believe that the private sector is able to acquire these. I think it's just very expensive to buy a minivan and then add in all the wheelchair upgrade accessibilities. And I think we've just seen that that's beyond the capacity of our local cab companies right now.
But isn't it true that they have been purchased in the past by various cab companies, including Union Cab?
They have been, and Union one point had a fleet of 9. They're now down to 3, and those were old used vehicles that they've managed to keep on the road, but they have not added new vehicles to their fleet that they purchased themselves in a long time.
Is this because the demand isn't sufficient to keep these vehicles on the road?
No, the demand is plenty sufficient from what I understand. I think it's more a question of, can they afford it?
Well, so you're saying the demand is there, but they can't afford the financing. Are you saying banks won't loan them the money?
Well, I don't think this is a money maker for them. Right. I don't think this is a really expensive asset to, that's tough to charge more for. So I'm not sure it's necessarily a great investment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would like to see more information on this, particularly from the cab companies themselves. I read your email, and I appreciate the work that you've done in this, but I wonder if this is something that the private sector, if the demand is there, couldn't in fact provide. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Vinover.
Question for staff. So just to try to understand paratransit services, as full disclosure, I'm not somebody who has used paratransit services or knows people who have used paratransit services. So my question is just how well do our paratransit services actually meet the needs of our population? And do you see this as a critical need in our community?
I can take that, unless there's anybody else on the call. So our paratransit service, I think, is extremely beneficial. There are limitations. One, you have to go through an enrollment process and certification process. And so there's certainly some people who have not yet gone through that process, but may have a disability that they may benefit from using a taxi cab. And probably the bigger challenge is the service is pre-scheduled. you need to schedule your trip at least 24 hours in advance. And so I think that's the other place where people have used other modes like taxis if they have an urgent need and they can't schedule that trip well in advance. So but overall, I think we've got we provide paratransit service, many other entities, particularly healthcare, have other contracts with other paratransit-like providers to provide accessible travel that doesn't actually go through our paratransit service. But there's certainly, with anything, there will be gaps in some places. But I don't really, as far as this particular program, I think, and I apologize, I got kicked off there for the very beginning of Alder Paulson's discussion, so I missed what alternate he is proposing. But I think just our struggle is how do we actually measure if this is successful, and how to make it successful, I think is my personal challenge. Just that there's even if we buy these vehicles, there's no guarantees that they'll have the people, the drivers to actually provide the service and see the benefit. So I think there's just some kind of bureaucratic challenges in front of it. But I think it's a noble goal, certainly. And there are gaps to fill. So.
Yeah, and then my other question was sort of like what other resources are there? Are there county resources? You mentioned the health systems. So I think it's similar to the question that Alder Evers was asking in terms of like, is this the city's role to fund private entities to do this work, or should we have enough resources within city, county to be able to provide people with the transportation that they need?
Yeah, I think that's a policy level decision that I probably can't really weigh in on.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Figueroa Cole.
Chair, I can have the same questions. Is this something that we should be funding paratransit more to get them up to speed and help them manage their schedule so they can have more flexibility instead of having to schedule 24 hours in advance? That's kind of where I am with this idea. I think it's I don't doubt that is something that is needed, but we already have something in place that, is it perfect, or can we make it even better if we invest more in paratransit that is already established and you know what I mean? Is that?
Yeah, so I think, Justin, it might be helpful for people to understand how paratransit funding is operated and funded, so people can understand a little bit maybe what possible options are there. So can you speak to the funding and the operation a little bit?
Yeah. So our so first, the service is provided. We do not directly operate the service. We have contractors that we work with that provide the service. We schedule the rides. Our call center, takes the request. We schedule it out, and then we provide a manifest to our private contractor that actually runs the service. And so that's
when you say we, you mean Metro or?
Yes, Metro does.
Okay.
And so that process, it goes through where, all day long we're receiving requests, and then at the end of the day we go through this process where we schedule them all out, and then the first thing in the morning we send this manifest over to our contractors, and they execute those trips through the day. And so there is a lot of challenges with kind of fitting in day of trips, because you kind of have to fit them around the ones that have already been scheduled. And often we are dealing with resource limitations, not necessarily dollars, but just people to drive these buses at our contractors too. And so they often struggle to handle the ones that are already scheduled, let alone trying to fit in new ones kind of with little notice. I think, is it possible if they're able to staff up and handle that probably. I think that there is some challenge with making it too much of an on-demand service. I think the demand will skyrocket if we allow people to just make a trip whenever they want instantaneously for $3. And so I think there is some of that we would need to understand, that if we did make it basically not a 24-hour notice service, we would see a significant increase in demand and therefore a significant increase in cost, if we could even provide that service based on the resources, the people that we have. On the funding side, we do receive some federal money for this program through what's called the FTA's 5310 program. And that does allow us to offset a significant portion of our costs to provide this service, but that funding is finite. It's not scaled based on the amount of service we provide. It's just fixed for our region. So.
Thank you, Justin. I'm sorry, I don't know why I always start calling you Jason. I honestly, you look like a Jason, I guess. So my apologies, Justin. So and in regards to the services that the call center receives today, do you have a way to measure these kind of requests from people? I mean, is this something that that the people that use the paratransit services today are asking you to provide more of?
So our service is, I'm sure there have been requests for same day service that we've not been able to provide. But our service it's a requirement of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so it's a zero denial service. So we cannot, if somebody makes a request and it meets the requirements in terms of 24-hour notice and all of that, we have to provide that trip. And so there is no real limitation on the amount of service we're providing. It's again, as long as they make that trip in advance and they are qualified and that trip is within our boundaries, we have to provide it. So
that's not what I meant. Like, do you have a metrics, a way, something in place to collect feedback where people ask you for same day services, and you tell them, well, no, we don't provide service, it's 24 hours. So do you have that data collected somewhere?
I don't. I can certainly look. I don't have it on hand. It's very clear in that registration process when they're getting certified that we are very clear with them all the way through that they must make that request in advance. Okay, so we probably don't get a lot of requests because they know that they very much know that is the rule.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Paulson, questions for staff?
No, I was gonna just kind of continue on with the discussion and respond to a couple of points that some of my colleagues had raised. So
wait, we'll come back to you. We still have questions, I think. Alder Furman, questions for staff?
Thank you, Mayor, and welcome. Thank you for taking the chair. Wanted to know if in the past or even in the future, if we've looked at other funding sources for this, such as the MPO. Are there other places that could fund a service like this? I'll put Justin on the spot or somebody from.
So yeah, Philip, I don't know if you want to weigh in on yeah, go ahead, Philip.
Yeah, so I can lean back on my previous experience at the MPO. I used to administer the 5310 program, and Union did request funding for these accessible taxis. They weren't eligible because they weren't providing a transit service, which is one of the requirements for eligibility for 5310 funding. So what that means basically is that they would have to allow multiple people to ride in the vehicle at any given time. The other concern is that the service wasn't limited to the accessible service. That was a question that we asked their GM if they could limit it to that. So they had an option to actually create a nonprofit arm where they could acquire the vehicles through the nonprofit and use them only for the accessible service. But in the time that I was there, that was an option that they declined. So there's an option, but from their standpoint, they mentioned scheduling challenges. They'd have to upgrade their software to allow a shared ride service to occur, which is not something that's part of their current business model. And they would need to basically create a new entity to acquire the vehicles if federal funding was going to be involved. That said, the federal funding was 80-20. So 80% federal funding, 20% local funding or funding from them. And then we would have been able to acquire the vehicles using the state contract. And the vehicles at that point were $38,000 all equipped through Rewald. So there were options there, but they decided not to go that particular route because it didn't fit within their business model.
That's helpful. That's helpful, and that really hits on what I guess my next question was going to be. I don't know if there's anybody else that has any additional history that they want to share about any of this. I think that was a lot of history about things that have been tried in the past. I don't know if anybody from the city side, I know that now you're with the city, but from city perspective that may have dealt with this in the past has anything to share. Raise your hand. If you don't, well, we'll just move on.
Hello?
Keith, go ahead.
Yeah, so I regulate taxi cabs for the city of Madison and have for some time. Union Cab is the only cab that currently provides this accessible service. And the only other licensed company currently is Madison Taxi, the only other one. So it would be one of those two would be eligible. And the distant history, I don't know how far we want to get in the past, there was an ordinance that required initially it required all the cab companies to provide accessible taxi cab service. And at the last minute, Union Cab said, we'll do it. And the other companies then were kind of let off the hook. There was an assessment 5 years to see if the needs were being met. And it was determined that the needs were being met. Although Union Cab is not necessarily legally required to keep providing the accessible service, they still do. I mean, it is an asset to the community. And unfortunately, their vehicles are diminishing. These vehicles are very expensive. And they generally use them as minimum amount as they can. Sometimes they'll leave a vehicle at the shop, and if they have an accessible ride, they'll have to driver will basically bring the regular taxi back to the shop, pick up the accessible vehicle to drive that person, and not really efficient. It's kind of a money loser in that regard. I'm not sure if I answered any questions, but if you have any other, I'd be happy to reply.
That certainly helped give some additional background. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Figueroa, additional questions?
Yeah, one more question that that he just reminded me, Mr. Pollock here. So if I am an Uber driver or any of those Lyft drivers or whatever, and I want to buy a van and provide the service, then I won't qualify for this type of support?
The way that this amendment is worded, you'd have to be a licensed taxi cab company. So it would actually only be Union or Madison Taxi would be the only eligible entities.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Are there any other questions for staff? Seeing no hands. Oh, Alder Carter, questions?
Yeah, just a real quick question for, I guess, Keith. Keith, can you tell me part of the ordinance, I believe you said, was that you had to be a taxi cab to provide this service? Is that because they have insurance to, I don't want to say protect, but they have liability insurance for not only the driver, but the passenger? Or does that not factor in, whereas Uber, Lyft, etc. might not have that?
I mean, that's the way this budget amendment was written. It only qualified licensed taxi cab companies. I mean, theoretically, you could open this up to other companies that have these types of vans, but it's not written that way.
Okay, thank you.
Ask Alder Paulson about that.
Thank you, Alder. Any other questions for staff? Seeing none, we'll go to discussion. Alder Paulson?
Sure. I just wanted to mention a couple things that came up in the questions. First off, the history of how we got here actually was starting from paratransit and seeing if we could do better on paratransit to get that scheduling down from 24 hours in advance to more same day. And when we kind of got into it with Justin and with Crystal Martin and others from Metro, we realized that particular thing was a very big can of worms, and we didn't want to directly tackle it. There are some improvements coming to Metro as part of the new software packages that are helping, that are going to make the scheduling system a lot easier and more efficient for folks. But we weren't quite ready to say, okay, let's tackle right into how do we get into anything same day. As for other funding sources, yes, we, Ben Lyman from MPO mentioned that there was probably would be some interest from the county, and when they said the Specialized Transportation Commission on the county side to maybe participate in that, and so that's sort of where we're again pitching this as, let's put the money in the budget and sort of get the broad approval from the council that this is the direction we should proceed, and then we can kind of really engage staff and our local experts and our local commissions and really figure out what's the best way to maximize this program. And then to Alder Carter's point, where you asked about how this was written for taxi cabs versus other systems, Ubers or Green Cab transition to this kind of transportation network, whatever the C is, the transportation network companies, whatever the TNC is, the equivalent of an Uber from the state regulation perspective. And there, one of the big differences is that the Madison taxi ordinances require you to provide 24-hour service, and so that's a big reason why we said, okay, this needs to be on the taxi side, mostly to keep the assets in service 24 hours a day, right? So if you buy an Uber driver who does a full shift, like that's 8 hours or 10 hours a day, and the car gets parked for the remaining 14 hours of the day. And so it's not a particularly efficient use of a capital asset, whereas putting it into a taxi cab, the drivers shift off during the day. So I think it's a better use of the capital funds. So that's why it's written that way. So I think I have said everything I can say between now and email. So I will hold off and maybe listen to some of the other comments and questions that come up and respond after everyone's had a more chance to dig into this. So thank you.
Thank you. Alder Furman?
Thank you. I definitely appreciate the intent of this, but unfortunately I won't be supporting this amendment. I think part of the problem is there's so much that is unknown at this point. I definitely know our paratransit needs to be better. I wish it could be better. It used to be better. And then the funding and financing changed and worsened service. Ultimately, I'm interested in having staff, continue to talk and see if they could figure something out with this. But I think committing money at this point, I'm not a fan. I think if the Alder was able to bring back a proposal and with an explanation, this will pass 20-0. The middle of next year in front of the council if the proposal makes sense. But I do struggle with the fact that this cab likely I would assume not necessarily just be used for this, and that would be giving an asset to a for-profit company to use how they see based on some of the things we heard today. It would be hard to administrate it any other way, and so I'm definitely interested in hearing about staff exploring this more. I don't think a budget amendment sometime next year to fund this would be a problem if the program is put together well, and so I can't support this amendment tonight, but I am hopeful that the council in the future will see something more developed related to this and make it more clear on how this would work. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder Evers.
Thank you, Mayor. Real quickly, I agree with Alder Furman. and also with Director Sternberg that this is a noble quest, noble desire, but I don't think it's sufficiently fleshed out to justify a $250,000 investment at this time. And with more work, perhaps this is something the council should be approving and the city should pay for. I'm not convinced of that at this point. I think that there may, in fact, be other options out there. And I would like to have more information before moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. I have no other alders in the queue wishing to speak. Oh, President Furman.
I just wanted to be clear, this might be the first thing that doesn't get voted for. I just want to be clear process-wise, if this alder wanted to bring it back at the Common Council, how would that work if we vote, if the majority of the Finance Committee today votes no?
That's an excellent question, President Furman, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you can offer an amendment again at the council level, even if it doesn't pass at the finance level. Dave is nodding, so that's the word. Alder Paulson.
Thanks. I'm not going to belabor this too much because I think I'm pretty sure that with 2 no's, and it already isn't going to get the votes necessary to pass. One thing I just wanted to point out is actually I do think it's a strength of this proposal that the cabs are used for non-accessible trips as well. For a capital asset, I think we want to keep it driving as much as possible. And so I think we're better off if the cabs are out providing services. As we know, it's tough to get a cab in Madison, and I think every little bit helps. From when we had preliminary discussions with Union Cab, certainly one of their challenges is finding drivers, but one of the points that they made was actually having updated vehicles would actually help them attract drivers. So I think that there's some benefits there. And taxi cabs are an important function, are an important component of civic life and an important civic service. And so I do think that it's we do need to be careful in finding that balance between supporting, making outright grants to private businesses that are better supported from private funds. But at the same time, there are, community services that are vital to the community that turns out that the private sector provides. And occasionally when the market fails, sometimes we do need to be prepared to step in and help out the market a little bit in this case. And I think accessible cabs, where it's an extraordinarily high capital cost with not a lot of profit opportunity, is one of those cases where we should be willing to make that, but we can have that discussion later in a different forum. So thank you all for your feedback here. And if we don't get this approved as part of the budget amendment, I am going to hold you to at least hearing that there is support for this broad concept, and hope that we're able to find some staff time to continue to develop this, because that's another of my concern is I don't want to spend a lot of staff time on something that's going to get a 1-19 vote at the council, because that's not an efficient use of anyone's time and demoralizing the staff. And also they got a lot to do. And so I will just close by taking an opportunity to thank staff for everything they've been doing for the city and for me for my couple months on the council so far. So thank you all.
Thank you, Alder. All right, the motion is to adopt Amendment 8. I anticipate a roll call request. So all those in favor of adopting Amendment 8, aye. Those opposed, no. As your name is called, then I'll ask Dave to call the roll.
Council President Furman?
No.
Alder Carter?
No.
Alder Verveer?
Aye.
Alder Vitiver?
No.
Alder Figueroa Cole?
No.
Alder Evers?
No.
There's 1 aye and 5 noes.
With 1 aye and 5 noes, the amendment fails. That takes us to Amendment number 9, which is in traffic engineering regarding the Safe Streets for All federal grant program. President Furman?
I move to place on file without prejudice.
Motion is to place on file without prejudice. Is there a second?
Second.
It's moved in second to place on file. Alder Paulson or Alder Furman, would you like to speak to it?
I'll speak to it just quickly. There's just been some new information, and so at this time, it was decided it was best to withdraw this amendment.
Are there any questions? Is there any discussion? Seeing none, is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor of placing on file without prejudice? Seeing no objection, the item is placed on file. That takes us to amendment number 10 in the water utility regarding unit well 14. President Furman?
Move adoption.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Council President Furman, do you wish to speak to this?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This well that services a portion of my district has had significantly high sodium and chloride issues for quite some time. Staff has been working to figure out different ways, where utility staff is working to figure out different ways to mitigate the continued increase. Part of that has come from salt usage on University Avenue, which feeds into this. But the salt's there, and it keeps going up. This amendment moves this project from 2024 to 2023. I spoke to water utility staff. They're honestly not absolutely convinced they can get this project done based on other priorities in 2023, but welcome the opportunity to at least have it as a possibility. This is desperately needed based on the high sodium and chloride readings that have consistently come back year after year in the water quality surveys. So I hope people support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, President Furman. Are there questions for staff? Alder Vitever.
Yeah, just going on what President Furman said, obviously, well 19 is on the docket, and that's my district. And so I know that that's a very high priority because that's getting actually radium and other nasties out. So just again, kind of asking the question about what is the capacity for this? And then the second question is, it gets put in the 2023 budget. If then we don't have capacity to get to it, we can just carry it forward into the 2024 budget, question mark.
All right, so on the second question, that's a finance question. And Dave, do you want to just refresh memory on reauthorizations of projects?
Certainly. So if there is remaining unused appropriation or borrowing authority, we do provide a list, and that is included in the subsequent capital budget and approved by the council to carry over. So if what you're seeing in the budget is new projects in terms of what's explained, and if the project continues, and most projects I would say continue over multiple years, that's the nature of the capital budget. They would be put into that carry forward appropriation and borrowing schedule. And we've now, with this capital budget, have put that list into each agency budget. So it's a lot more transparent for the council. And then you're voting on that in both the new projects and the carry forward when you vote on the budget.
And then on the first question about water utility capacity, we have Joe Demaray here.
Yep. We should have enough staff and enough resources to get this project done next year. We actually started it a little bit earlier this year at President Furman's request. And so we've got a good start on it already. And it's not as big of a project as yours, Well 19. And it looks like Well 19 might actually go into the next year anyways. We're finding that we're probably not going to get it done next year or in 1 year. So I think there'll be plenty of time. And I think we have actually a good route to remediate this well and basically not have to drill a new one. So I'm positive, and I think we all are. So I think we'll be okay.
Thank you, Joe. Any additional questions for staff? Seeing none, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on amendment number 10? Seeing no discussion, is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor of amendment number 10. And that, I believe, is the list of amendments. So just want to confirm that we had a motion to adopt to begin with. So we have a motion to adopt the capital budget. And then so on the capital budget as amended, are there questions? Is there discussion? Is there objection to recording unanimous vote in favor? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor, and the capital budget as amended by the Finance Committee will go back to the council for public hearing and further amendment in November. I believe that is the business in front of us tonight for the Finance Committee. So President Furman?
Move adjournment.
Second.
It's moved and seconded to adjourn. Is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor? Seeing no objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all. Have a good evening.